So good morning, my name is Daniela Tishi and I'm an instructor in the agribusiness program at the Russ Edwards School of Ag and Environment right here at Brandon that is in Wynford College. So I'd like to welcome you all to Manitoba Ag Days, where Ag Year begins. And on behalf of the Board of Directors and Management team, I'd like to acknowledge that our event takes place on Treaty 2 territory, the traditional shared land of the Dakota, Anishinaabe, Chikri, Cree, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. At Manitoba Ag Days, we respect and acknowledge the history of the land and the people of this area. Have a great day. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Just a reminder to everybody to please have their cell phones on silent or vibrate. And if you need to take a call, feel free to just step out into the hallway and do that. There are CCA credits, CE and CU credits available for these Agrarity sessions. So there is a sign-up sheet just on the back table out there. So please make sure you either sign in or take a picture of the QR code and that we can collect your credits. Yeah, I think that's me, housekeeping. So let's get started. I would like to introduce our moderator for this section, Jay Whetter. Jay has been an agriculture journalist in 26 years and is the editor of the Canola Digest magazine, word leader of Canola Wash, and does some freelance writing for Country Guide, Manitoba Cooperator, and other publications. In October 24, he and Tobin Dick launched a new podcast called The Extensionists. Jay grew up on Shane Lake's farm at Dan, Manitoba, and now lives in Winnipeg. And as it happens, he and I went to the same high school, so welcome.
My mic is on? Yeah. All right, we're going to talk about carbon today. I hope you leave smarter than when you came in, but there's still all the hands of questions in part. And we've got a panel of three people who are at various stages of the carbon market. Warren Ellis is a well-known name in Southwest Manitoba. Farms of Wawanesa, seed company there, LLCs. Well, I've known Warren for a long time. He's also director for management of Canola Corporation. Warren is not currently involved in a carbon market program, but its sort of philosophy of farming is a real strong ecological sense of the land, of the environment, and it's run a successful business even with a philosophy like that. So Warren is really encouraging approach to farming. Chris Seymour farms at Manitou, mixed farm there, and Chris is involved in a carbon-related program with Mexico, and we'll get more into that, and Chris has been involved in others as well. And then Devron Kobluk grew up at Ellis on a mixed farm there as well, equals to cattle there. And Devron is in the thick of the carbon part. He runs a company called Continuum, which actually works with farmers in both in Saskatchewan, but a few in Manitoba, on the scheme to generate carbon credits. So we've got three stages of experience in carbon, and I think that was a really rich discussion. I can't see you very well with the lights, but I'd like to keep this as much of a town hall kind of thing as possible. So rather than waiting at the end for a question, if there's something you want to jump in on right away, either yell out or maybe someone at the back can see you and then bring a mic. Daniela, EPC? Okay. And we'll get a mic into you there now, and we'll keep this conversation going throughout. So we won't necessarily have Q&A in the end. Just jump in at any time with your questions. I've also encouraged the three panelists to ask the other questions, so I'll just speak. We're going to kick off with a question that actually is the name of this session. Are you missing out on the carbon revolution? And we're going to start with Warren because he is right now on the outside looking in. Warren, do you feel like you're missing out, or are you right where you want to be right now with regard to carbon?
Well, I don't feel like we're missing out, but we do want to get more involved. I think it's an opportunity to make money, so we want to get involved.
And why do you think it's an opportunity to make money?
Well, farming has afforded us this great opportunity to sequester carbon, and we get paid for that because they push the program pretty well. So there's another way. If you can imagine that, sequestering carbon about doing things like trees and perennial crops and maneuvers needs. So I suspect a little bit, well, we're a bit more about the idea. Yes, that there's an opportunity to sell that, and it's lots of money. Lots, well, good thing.
Yeah. Are you where you want to be, or you're involved, and you want to be more involved, or you might look for your opportunity?
Let's say, or where we want to be right now. Sure. Right. Great. Probably raise more. So, right. Years. We have spelling to us. They just ask questions. Just be aroused. How many?
Yeah, here. Sorry, covered. Sorry, I'll start again there. We just, we're kind of where we want to be. For now, like, I think there's more potential, as I just said, like, there's money to be made. But we kind of fell into the program we are a part of. It's on oats and Canola, and it was just, we started intercropping oats, and I reached out to, Quaker through the buyer, and I wanted to make sure, okay, is this going to be an issue for some pea cracks? What's my limit? And they're like, that's how 3 years ago this all started was, actually we're looking to start a program. So we became the first farm here, I think Canada, but Manitoba for sure. So a lot of the programs, I've been a part of the two now. And so far this one fits really well for us because they're interested in cropping crops. A lot of other programs also look at too, there is some fertilizer. That's all they care about, but that doesn't fit for us because we're reducing our fertilizer, we're not changing ESN to compress it like that. So it's, as it evolves, I think there's more potential. Right now, where we want to be, starting out.
Can you tell me again how that conversation went? So you said you fell into it. So what, did you think you might want to be involved, or was it that question? Like, can you just walk me through that conversation, and then all of a sudden you hit the car in the park?
There was no market, like, there was no program at all. And I talked to, Anderson is the merchant. Let's go directly from Drummaker to Quaker. It's pretty direct cars. And I reached out and I just said, hey, this is what we're starting to do. I did a test field year 4, turned out well, we'll do more acres. It was going to be, at that you turn those most wireless. So I'm like, I can't exactly blend them off if there's some pea crabs in there. And unless I'm going to hire someone professionally to pay up, I can get, there's a few crabs to escape. And so they're like, well, yeah, we'll look into it. So they talked to their reps and it ended up going way up the chain, and all of a sudden I was getting phone calls from someone with Dallas, I can't remember his name, for Quaker, and he wanted to get in touch with Bon Shaw and Southeast Research Fire because they were the ones that were going to organize this program for them. But the first year there was no programming, so they wanted Fire to be involved in actually designing it. So that's where they didn't know how it was going to bump at the time, the first year. So, and we discussed it on when you're starting a new program. I said, I don't think the industry's there yet, that they focus on farmers just bring the effort forth to make change when they want to support that. And not actually, because it's a lot of cost to them, it's up to measure what the sequestration and soil. So that's where it's based on what's your effort to progress your farmer forward in that.
Right now, we're going to get into all those processes. And then so Quaker's a division of Pepsi. If I mentioned Pepsi, all that is more of it.
Yeah, the money comes from Pepsi as through Quaker, and actually the Amherst is who I sell oats to, and then the Southeast Research Farm in Redvers is who's running the program for them. So it's kind of complicated that way, but
So
yeah.
just before we leave this, though, I want one bit of advice, like for any farmer delivering would you just say, is there an opportunity to make some money off carbon here? Or how would someone who's not in a carbon market have that conversation with their grain buyer, say?
That's a good question.
Just ask and see what happens?
Just ask. I don't know, it seemed to work for us.
Yeah.
I've asked because, well, we're adopted a lot of the regenerative farming practices. I don't like to label it as that because some people get their back up as, oh, we're doing it for the sake of land's expensive, hard to come by. We can get more land. We've increased our cattle. We can double up on every acre. The cows follow the crop across the field in the fall, things like that. So just kind of practices we started to do already just fit well into these programs, right? So we didn't make decisions based on, I could get some extra money from a program that made sense for the farm, and then we found a program that fit for that, is how it worked.
Okay, good. We'll dig into that more. Devron, so you're not missing out on the carbon revolution. You're kind of in the middle of it. But is there a general statement that agriculture on the prairies is missing out on an opportunity, or are we right where we want to be? Like, are we slowly easing into a market?
Well, I think we're slowly easing into it, but to answer that question, from the point of us at Continuum being a voluntary carbon credit project developer, we view this market just like Bitcoin was 10 years ago. And I mean, anybody can pick up their phone right now and look at the price of what a Bitcoin was. Everybody didn't realize or quite comprehend the inherent value of a Bitcoin, and it went from, basically, a couple of dollars a Bitcoin to, I think today, about $112,000 Canadian. Again, that sort of mathematical equation and how it was built is similar to how the voluntary market is definitely changing from the analog world to the digital world. So with the producers that we work with, we rely heavily on remote sensing for tracking crop growth and almost real-time carbon sequestration rates. We also utilize blockchain technology and artificial intelligence and machine learning, which I believe is going to drastically change a lot of the agricultural industry.
Okay, wow. Where do we go with that? So you had blockchain, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. You also talked about Bitcoin, which we could have sessions on all four of those. But I'm curious about the analog to digital, and why is that useful in tracking carbon?
Yeah, well, I guess again, depending upon your age and where you were farming, you may or may not have been approached by a voluntary carbon credit project developer. I mean, I can remember all the way back when I was in high school in the early 2000s that the Chicago Climate Exchange was out in our area signing up producers saying, keep your pasture and hay land like this for the next 10 years and we'll pay you $3 an acre. And never heard from them again, right? And again, that sort of lingering bad taste is still there. And the way that we've approached this market, again, is it's very hard to take what the Climate Exchange was trying to do, which is a 2D paper contract, and try to describe what's happening on the 3D environment, right? So when you take that analog contract and you now digitize it with, remote sensing and EMI scans and apply, again, a statistical analysis that's based upon machine learning, you start to get a real picture of accurately measuring soil carbon sequestration, which practices contribute to that soil carbon sequestration, and more importantly, that attains the value that needs to be in these carbon credits for guys to continue to adopt different and more types of regenerative agricultural practices.
All right, so back to the question, would you say, I'm not sure what percentage of farmers are involved in a carbon program. Let's say 5% are. I'm just throwing out a number. Like, would you think the other 95, like, when should they start looking into it in a serious way?
Well, I think, again, from the information I've seen, there's probably less than 0.1% of the total land base of Western Canada under any type of carbon credit project. I mean, when should a producer start looking at it? I mean, I would suggest now. I mean, just to give the audience an overview, last year we onboarded about 45,000 acres of mainly cropland and also some pasture land. And again, it was quite the effort working with Westman soil sampling to get these samples pulled, because the most inherent prohibitive cost to a producer is, you know, why would I change what I'm doing right now if I've got to, you know, take all of these out-of-pocket expenses for lab fees and soil sampling teams and a registration process and a verification process? I mean, for a producer to do it on its own, I mean, it's quite the financial hurdle, and that's why project developers kind of take that financial burden off of the producer, allows them to focus on farming, and we focus on the bureaucratic side and dealing with the red tape and taking it away.
Well, quickly, how does that work, Devron? Like, if a farmer wants to sign on with you, you do all of the upfront baseline measuring to get them into the program, and then how do you share the revenue after that?
Yeah, there's an equity split on the gross amounts of credits that's created, and the majority of it goes to the producer, because it has to go to the producer. And if you look at the, you know, voluntary markets right now and the issues that they've had with price discovery and this term called greenwashing, is we're able to fix that and continue to make it transparent to the buyers that we are anonymously tracking the costs associated with that credit. So case in point, if a producer is moving to utilize biostimulants and the biostimulants cost X amount of acre, we're able to make sure that that knowledge is transferred to the buyer to a certain regard. And there's more cost than just that specific change in farming practices, depending upon what that guy wants to do. But it's no different than anything else. How do you validate a value of a voluntary carbon credit if you don't know how much it took to create it? Right? Which is why, again, you can easily open up your Google and look at all the carbon credit fraud that's been going on in the past 10 years. And again, what's changing very quickly through digitization, but more importantly, artificial intelligence, is, again, the speed of which this can happen, and what I see is ever-increasing prices for these carbon credits. And the last thing to add to that value side or value proposition is, again, because of the remote sensing data that we have and the ability of computers to really map out and figure out, you know, what is climate change and how is climate change related to weather pattern disruption. What a researcher by the name of Alpha Liu has found is our intercontinental rain here in North America, 60 to 90% of it comes from plant and soil transpiration and not evaporation, right? So again, with reductions of soil organic content, 1 gram of carbon in the soil holds 7 grams of water, the typical average agricultural soil. And again, I know there's lots of types of soils and guys doing different things, but on average, that carbon content is less than 2%, and we're still losing about 1/4 inch of soil every year across Western Canada because of not just practices, but weather conditions, right? So I guess the point is, when you put that carbon back into the soil or grasslands or wetlands or trees, with the satellites right now, you're able to definably show that you're creating a microclimate by adding that carbon back into the soil, right? And again, a lot of this research from Alpha Lu is based in the United States. About 4 years ago, at the Regenerative Ag Conference here in Brandon, there was a presentation done by Alberta Crop Insurance, and you know, after the presentation, I went and spoke with him. His sort of, message to get to the audience was Alberta Crop Insurance, through volunteers and also long-term carbon soil monitoring stations, found that as the carbon content of agricultural soils increased, the chances of an adverse weather event, whether it was flood, drought, disease, and hail, decreased. So a healthy soil with high carbon content had a less of a chance of having an adverse event. And obviously my first question to him was, you know, when is Alberta Crop Insurance going to reduce their premiums?
Yeah.
And
For people who increase their soil carbon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was a very quick response. It was, you know, we're a Crown Corp and we don't work that fast, so give us about 10 years.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's just how it is. So.
Okay. Well, so many things we'll have to touch on. Chris, you're nodding. Any response? Like, what Devron was just saying, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, like we made the practice switches for the water and the adverse weather conditions. Like, so it's only been in the last 5 years we've transitioned. We were heavy tillage, doing it twice a year. We kind of were doing down to one in a lot of cases. We were tilling twice. We were spraying fungicides, insecticides. We were doing everything. There was no cover crops, and actually we didn't really have many cows. We just got into cows, I think, 8 years ago. Just events, but and I was really pushing my father that we got to switch for the sake of these droughts are going to be more frequent, and when we get rain, it'll come hard, because we've had 4 to 6 inches of rain for 3 years straight. It's all we had, but it only came in 2 rains. And one time it was the same weekend, and we had 0 rain the rest of summer. It all ran into the pond. You know, we didn't keep the water. So that's why we started switching what we're doing, and to try and it's one farm doesn't make a big difference, but if a lot of people got on board and we could cycle through the transpiration and everything, we can actually affect the rain cycles. These droughts that everyone's complaining about can be affected, but you know, it's going to take a long time for everyone to get on board and understand. But yeah, like we never made these switches to chase carbon credits or anything like that. We made the switches because, in our view, it was long-term financial. You know, we were looking at long-term, short-term, probably didn't make any extra money, but in long-term, resiliency in our soil is what we're after.
So if you weren't getting the carbon credits, do you feel like the 8 years or so of these new practices to improve soil quality, are they working yet? Or what's the time horizon to start seeing a return on that?
I would argue is year one.
Oh yeah?
So most people don't exactly believe this, but 4 years consistently of intercropping, and fairly simple, we just do peas and oats. It's been our #1 profitable crop. No matter any other crop hasn't beat it. The only other crop that's been close is oats, yielding 150 bushel an acre. Has been close.
Peas and oats are your most profitable crop.
As an intercrop. Yep.
How does that go over with your neighbors? Like, are people starting to accept that this might actually be true?
We do put a farm tour on every summer. We've been doing it for 4 years now. The first year, 2 guys showed up. Second year, we had 5, and last 2 years, we've had around 20 farms showing up. They're starting to get more interest. A lot of our close neighbors, though, the guys showing up mostly have mixed farms or are already trying some stuff themselves. A lot of close neighbors and stuff, they look at it, and they look at our field and say, oh, there's weeds there. Well, not an economic amount, like they're not affecting. And actually, ironically, we had some very serious issues with wild oats. And we were growing lots of oats, and we weren't sure how we were going to deal with that in the future. There were certain fields we couldn't grow oats on. We still don't grow oats on those fields. But with switching and what we're doing now, we have less issues. Like, I mean, our focus is farm with the soil instead of trying to control it. Is kind of the way I'd word it. And it's just exactly what Devron was talking about here, is the praxis just match up perfectly. So like I wouldn't make the changes because you want to chase a carbon credit. I'd make the changes because you will see resiliency in your farm.
So the carbon credit is like a bonus for something you would have done anyway.
It's gravy money because I wasn't going to make that decision for that.
Warren, what do you think of what you've heard from these two guys so far?
Well, I agree. On our own farm, we're not chasing carbon credits, but we are doing a lot of different things that we might be eligible for carbon credits, and it was along the same line as what you were just saying. And,
is that how are we okay? No, Mike, closer? Maybe just a bit closer.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
So so it's now I'm hearing myself.
Yeah, that's good.
Louder than what I'm speaking. For our farm, we're doing a number of different things that would be considered conservation, I suspect. But we're doing it because it makes sense for our farm. It's not because it fits into any kind of a program. But we do recognize that there are opportunities, in what we're doing that may arise that we could make some additional money by trading some carbon credits. So that's how we view it. But yeah, we're doing the same types of things. We're minimum tillage since the 1980s, where we were so dry that we couldn't fill a glass of water. So ever since then we've been minimum tillage and close to zero tillage, and it's been working for us. We're still here, so I guess it's working. So that's what we were doing, and look, we actually tried to get into. We did sell some carbon credits at one point by putting a coating on our fertilizer, and we were able to sell the carbon credits for I think about $9 an acre, and the coating cost $11 an acre. But that was $2 was peanuts because we were gaining fertilizer usage. But the other thing that happened was the government was running a program that paid another I think $8 an acre for that kind of a program. So we ended up making about $17 an acre, and it costing us $11.
How did you find out about both of those programs?
Well, the first one, it was an experimental program put on by a grain company who was selling, that we were buying fertilizer from. And they had this experimental program of, they're trying to establish a market for carbon credits. And so it was an experimental thing. And the other one was a government program that we just read and ran across. Now the sad thing about the government program, I have two sad things. The government program required a verification by a licensed agronomist. And none of the licensed agronomists that were on the list were anywhere near our farm. And we already had an agronomist, so we didn't want to hire another one. So we ended up not getting that $8 an acre. We just thought it wasn't worthwhile. And then with regard to the selling of carbon credits, we were on it for a year or two maybe, and then the company decided that they put a minimum amount of canola acres you had to plant to be on that program, and we don't plant that much canola, so we went off the program. But we're continuing on with ESN as our fertilizer as opposed to just coating it.
Okay, so even outside the program,
even outside the program, it's worthwhile.
The agronomics are worthwhile.
Yeah. So now we use ESN, and it's eligible for carbon credits, but with that particular company, we can't use it because they want 500 acres and we only grow 300 acres.
Yeah, okay. I think we're going to talk briefly about trees, which we'll come back to. But Devron, we're going to get into a bit of the practices that can trigger a carbon credit. You were talking about we chatted yesterday, Devron and I had a little meeting yesterday, and about this whole farm approach and how the areas in non-annual crops, like the forest, the wetlands, et cetera, can actually be part of a carbon program. Are you ready to dig into that a bit? Like how does that whole farm approach possibly work on the credit side of things?
Yeah, just to maybe expand on that a little bit. I mean, our sort of marketing approach when we initially started out with the 45,000 acres that was tested last spring, again, spread across Saskatchewan and Manitoba, with the majority in Saskatchewan. Most of these farms are located in what's called the Aspen Parkland region. And it is a UN designated endangered biome. And the reason that it's endangered is because these trees sit upon agricultural soils. And as farming economics continue to push producers to farm every potential acre, we continue to lose the forest and tree structure that's providing our localized rain patterns. So what we are working on for 2025 is an ability for a producer to enroll his Aspen Parkland forest, which right now isn't making him any money, and get it onboarded into a carbon credit program in which those acres, in my opinion, are going to slowly be substantial to his net retained earnings for his entire farm. And just to kind of give you an example, I mean, I've spoken to a producer, I think he farms around 10,000 acres, but within that 10,000 acres, there's like 5,000 acres of Aspen Parkland forest, which is within a watershed valley system, and it's just kind of being left there. So if you take that 5,000 acres and include it in a voluntary carbon credit project, I mean, my opinion is it's going to be a substantial portion of his gross income as a farm. But then the question is for the producer is, the lack of knowledge in forestry, how do I meet this additionality to onboard it, and how do I make sure that I don't get burnt in this whole entire process? And that's where kind of Continuum comes in to, again, provide a way to alleviate a lot of this red tape and bureaucratic structure through utilizing remote sensing and machine learning. And one other thing I'd like to mention, whether it's agriculture or potentially forests or wetlands that are being preserved and managed in a better way to increase and enhance carbon sequestration, is that Continuum has been able to be underwritten by a UK insurance broker for our entire project here in Western Canada. And that insurance product just increases in value as more acres get onboarded. And again, I think that provides more legitimacy, not only to the producers that we want to enroll, but it provides the legitimacy to the buyers who say, okay, I'm gonna pay this producer, $35, $45, $55 a credit, but you guys gotta prove to me that you're spending that money on something that is substantially and shown to sequester that carbon back into the soil. And again, when you can put those pieces up, because as was mentioned before, this undeniable data of restoration of the small water cycle is starting to get into the mainstream news now. It's like you put the forest back and the rains come back. And again, it's just about sharing education with producers and municipalities and provincial governments, and more importantly, federal governments at some point.
Crop insurance, yeah. I want to go to this baseline measurement and stick with you, Devron. So with your program, getting a baseline soil carbon, which does require a lot of soil testing, which you help farmers pay for, or you pay for. Why is that baseline measurement important before a farm starts taking on new practices?
Well, Well, again, you got to know where to start, and the whole market premise is based upon the physical measurement of carbon being sequestered year on year. So that baseline is, you know, important to provide that benchmark, not only for the sale of the carbon credits, but as producers start to get their heads wrapped around the certain practices that increase carbon sequestration, I think we're gonna find some very bright producers that figure out a better way than perhaps some other people to sequester more carbon in a year than perhaps their neighbors. And you know, the one item I would bring up again, it's relating back to the Manitoba Regenerative Conference, and that professor's name, Jay, was who? I forget again. Mike was.
Oh, it was David Rourke.
Yeah,
from,
David.
From here, well, Minto.
Minto.
Yeah, not a prof.
Yeah. So. Professor Rourke has written a book about, again, his experiments with reducing petroleum usage in his farm. What he found is, even in our climate, the potential of sequestering up to 5 to 6 credits per acre is doable. Again, it's a lack of knowledge in looking at the practices that need to be implemented to try to get this done. So again, if I were to just share a quick, you know, best case scenario, I mean, is guys, again, figure out how the carbon and soil health interacts with their commercial crops and yields, and you're looking at, you know, 5 to 6 credits per acre that's starting to hit $35, $45, $55 a credit. I mean, that's starting to be substantial. And I'll let the crowd Google what the projected price of a voluntary credit is going to look like in the next 10 years. And when you look at those numbers, I mean, you start seeing farming for carbon being on an equal footing of, you know, planting oats or canola or wheat.
Yeah, and what you're doing also, so you're getting 2 revenue streams. There's a word you use, Chris, I want to just define additionality, and then I'll come to you. Oh, yeah? Okay, so Devron, can you just, so you use the word additionality, maybe not today, but in the past. And that's why that baseline is important, because that carbon sequestration credit is for adding more carbon. So any practice in the past, there's no credit for that in this scenario, but it's the additionality of increasing the carbon.
Yeah, this additionality is kind of like word soup, because it's an opinion, right? And if I had to explain it in one sentence, what additionality means is doing a practice that you wouldn't otherwise be doing because you're getting paid to do it through the generation of carbon credits. Okay. Right? And, you know, typically in more times than not, that additionality, because it's such a gray area, was used for nefarious means. And why we have a current problem in the voluntary market with this greenwashing is because no one can track what credit went where and who got paid what and where all the money went. And again, this is why, you know, digitization is so important. And I will mention the registry that we work with. It's called Social Carbon. It's based out of the UK, and they're, again, blockchain enabled, and they also embrace utilizing remote sensing and machine learning and AI to help solve this problem.
Okay. So additionality might, we'll use like a uncertain term, but going back to the baseline, that baseline measurement and that soil testing and these machine learning tools to kind of assess the carbon level without having to do all that soil testing, that's still an important step, is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to take these soil samples, and again, just because of the large spaces that we have here in Western Canada, I mean, there's just a definite lack of wet lab capacity, so we had to be very creative with a smaller wet lab to make sure the certification process, you know, went without a hitch, right? And again, the largest sunk costs in onboarding these projects, again, is the lab cost and the soil sampling costs, the registration and verification of the project. And again, a lot of guys that have looked at it in the past just kind of throw their hands up because this is so complicated. And, you know, I guess my point is as time moves on, this is going to get less and less complicated.
Okay.
And again, the value add is just only going to exponentially increase on the carbon payment side, but adversely on the soil health side, you're going to continue to see better resilient soils for, you know, diseases and flooding and drought, just like
Chris was saying.
like Chris was saying.
And Chris, you've got a question for Devron.
Yeah, so I was just, when you're talking about farms getting their soil carbon tested now, and do you see any retroactive payments happening in the future? Where, like, let's say I know I'm already building soil carbon with the way we're farming, like the cover crops, all that stuff. So if I take the gamble, I guess, I go and I have to cost me obviously I'm not on a program, but cost me to get that soil sampled and get that baseline now. Do you see retroactive, or is there any incentive for something like that? Or do you just wait till you get a program coming your way that now that's your baseline? Because, like, you know, there's going to be farms who are early adopters. You're going to miss out, because my understanding too is it's easier to build soil carbon earlier. Does that make sense? Or have you seen that where, like, you make those drastic system changes, you'll build some soil carbon earlier, but then when you're in those practices, it might not, or is it pretty steady all the way through?
Well, I guess the first part of your question with the retroactiveness, I mean, again, it's an issue that, again, is a sticking point for a lot of guys, because, I mean, you know, thinking about all the farmers that I've spoke to in the past that adopted zero-till early on, and they say, well, why can't I get paid for that? And I mean, I feel for them, but the issue at the end of the day is what amount do you put per acre to it, right? I mean, there's no way to figure it out, though I am aware that there is a possibility of retroactively going back in time if soil carbon testing was a part of the producer's standard soil sampling. Because now you can have the actual numbers to go retroactively back, and I have seen some ag projects, regenerative ag projects, go back up to 3 years because they had the data available to be verified, right?
So if someone's soil testing, like a field composite sample, does that qualify? Or, like, you know, is it something that's not, if you're already doing a soil test, I think probably to get that, I mean, is it $10 a test or 20 to get that extra? What, like, is that something to consider?
Well, it would all come down to specifically what's done. Again, the way that we test is a TOC and a bulk density plus an EMI scan, right? And again, Continuum covers those costs up front for the producer. It would all be on a case-by-case basis based upon the data that each farm has, right? And, you know, the second part of your question is sort of this early adoption in carbon sequestration in rates and when they go up and when they decrease. I mean, the work that I've done before specifically working in agricultural carbon and the stuff that I have, you know, done in the past, the way that I would explain it is soil biodiversity and the populations of the specific fungal and bacterias in that soil are the main driver of the things that you see with your eyes, right? So there's companies out now that's doing eDNA testing, so you can get a DNA test done of your soil, which again would help in assessing the potential of a voluntary carbon credit project. So I guess my point is, again, there are studies out of U of C Davis in California where regenerative ag practices are implemented, and yes, they are throwing the whole boat at it, and the producers have bought into it 100%, and what they're seeing is, and again, warmer climate, but what they're seeing year on year is they're able to build anywhere between a 1/2 inch and a 1/4 inch of soil every year. So that carbon sequestration is going to go until you have another 4 feet of topsoil, if done properly.
I think when you're talking about avoided emissions, that falls under the Scope 4 category, where we deal mostly in Scope 2 and 3 with farmers do. The Scope 4 is the avoided emissions that are avoided. So that would be a zero-tiller, a fellow who's zero-tilling for the last 20 years. And farmers, have always tried to conserve. Thank you. Farmers always are trying to conserve, and so we talk about Scope 4 emissions, and the Manitoba canola growers recognize that, and we don't have a system for looking into it, so we talked to CAP, and CAP did a real intensive study on Scope 4 emissions, and came back that it was a little bit soon yet for Scope 4, but the lending institutions are starting to get more and more interested in it, and there's a possibility that down the road it might develop into something.
And how could you start tracking that now, Warren, so that in preparation for it, or is that going to be once it's announced, then it's anything after that?
Well, the thing is, it's not even close to being announced. There's nothing to be announced. So, I think record keeping is always a good idea, but I don't know. It's so early in that area that there's no direction right now at all. So it's something to watch, but it's not something to hang your hat on. It's not going to happen overnight.
Devron, before we leave Chris's thought, just because I think there's a message there, with the soil sampling, if farmers, or if there's any hope of a retroactive payment, should soil sampling now include a carbon analysis? And what was it, EMI? Is that electromagnetic imaging? Is that the Veris, or what is that exactly? How do you?
It's a service done by Westman Soil Sampling for us, and again, typically it's done for applications in agronomy. The reason that we're doing it is it's providing greater insights to soil carbon sequestration, because again, it's all obviously a game of numbers and statistics, because if we have enough data, we can continue to reduce the wet lab sampling density, right, to again, save costs in onboarding. So again, as more and more producers sign up with us, things will continue to get more and more streamlined. And the one thing I will mention is, either in 2025 and pushing into 2026, we're going to have the ability to have in situ soil sensors that will in real time monitor this carbon sequestration, because again, when you start taking the wrapping off the present, so to speak, right now we're only measuring total organic carbon sequestration. What we know is happening is that there's an interaction between your soil biodiversity and the natural minerals in your soils. So these healthy soils are also sequestering inorganic carbon.
And that still counts?
And that is not counted right now because nobody can measure it.
Oh, okay.
And our goal is to measure it.
And so in situ, so you've got a probe in the field all the time and tracking carbon as it cycles. I don't know whether it cycles through a year, but or steadily increases, and that reduces the overall cost of annual soil sampling. And that's approved now, or are you still in the beta testing stage? Like with your downstream, the people who actually pay the credits, are they okay with this as a monitoring, measuring tool?
Yeah, our registry is currently going through they're called protocols, so they're assessing the protocols of this probe, of what it's claiming to do, and making sure that the test results are truthful and transparent.
The three more things I want to cover off while we're here together are practices, which we'll get to, and risks. So there's two. We did the baseline one already. But Warren, I wanted to just go back to the Devron's trees comment, because I know you like trees and a lot of farmers do. And so what do you think about that as adding to your forest, or maintaining your forest, maintaining your wetlands as a way to actually, ultimately possibly get paid a carbon credit for that?
Well, I'm just we've got this idea on our farm about how we want to proceed. And what we've noticed is that we always have one field that yields better than all the rest. And I've talked to a lot of farmers, and every farmer has that one field that yields better than all the rest. And when you talk to them and you ask, okay, tell us about the field, and I'm thinking of my own field, is that there are trees around that field. And we talk about a microclimate, and there's water there. And so there's a lot more things going on there, and there's a general increase in life around that soil, on that field. And the interesting thing is, so then the thought is, okay, so we've got this one field, why wouldn't we try to replicate that across our entire farm? And so what we're trying to do is plant trees around and retain as much water as we can. So we're working with the conservation district in putting up dams wherever we can find a spot, and we're trying to plant trees. We've got a number of miles sort of targeted for that, and hopefully we're getting a mile put in this spring. Plans are often don't necessarily come true, but that's certainly the hope anyway. And so that's the idea, is that as you increase all this. Well, it just so happens that if you're doing that, that's the same thing that you can sell carbon credits. So carbon credits, as we were saying before, aren't the reason to do it. Oh, there we go. And aren't the reason to do it necessarily, but it is a nice little bonus if you can do what you want to do, increase the value of all the other fields, and sell some carbon credits.
So Devron, when you hear Warren say that, do you think Ellis Farms should have a baseline measurement done? Or is it they're going to do it anyway, the carbon, if it comes eventually, will just be a bonus? Like, should they spend some money on a full farm baseline carbon analysis?
Well, I mean, again, it comes down to having that benchmark of knowing where to start or what's measured at the very start. I mean, it's important that this data is collected early on in some type of form, which I would recommend it simply being an enrollment within a voluntary carbon credit project. Then you're not really shooting yourself in the foot, because again, if you start moving forward with these practices, and again, don't discount the fact that these credits at some point, and I won't put out a date to predict when, are going to hit $100, $150, $200 a credit. And all of a sudden you're saying, wow, this makes my farm actually sustainable as a cash flow operation. And you started doing these things and didn't collect the data. There's no way to prove this.
So you could still get the 150 a year kind of going forward.
Going
right?
forward,
yeah.
Moving
but
forward.
If the easiest carbon to get is the first carbon, Chris, to your point, I don't want Warren to miss out on some potential credits by doing this before. You know what I'm saying, Warren? Am I making any sense?
No, absolutely. Yeah, no. I mean, that's why I joined the panel, so I can hear this. No, that's absolutely right, and it makes sense. I mean, when you talk about the early carbon is the easiest. I can't think of an analogy, but if you've got a whole lot of, if you're cleaning out a pail, the first scoops are the easiest to get out. And then when you get down to the last little bit in the pail, it gets harder and harder to clean it out. Oh, I did think of an analogy. So I mean, yeah, so that all makes sense. So yeah, so that's good advice.
Yeah. Chris, are you ready to talk about practices? Sure. Okay. With your program,
actually, I did have one question for you, Warren. When you're planting a mile of trees, does your watershed aid you in care for those trees, or does that fall solely on you? Because I know some watersheds help plant, and then that's it, or is it, I just didn't know how that worked.
Neither do I. We're just going to plant them, but maybe we should be looking into that.
Can you clarify that question? What are you asking?
I like trees too. The problem is getting them from twigs to trees takes an awful lot of effort.
Yeah.
Something that I know most farms do not have extra labor or time to do. So that was my question is, are any of the watersheds, I know our watershed doesn't do so much. There's out of Stanley's around Morden, that RM has someone that works for them that he'll come to our area through the watershed, he'll plant the trees, but I think that's kind of it.
Yeah.
So it's great, they get the trees planted. I got a neighbor that's done it a bunch too, but then
That's the easy
now
part.
that's the easy part. I know, like, we have a bunch of tree rows around our yard, and they're kind of falling down. We'd like to fix them up because with the cows, windbreak's a nice thing. Our cows are in the field year round. My mom spent 15 years riding her horse hoeing them when she was a kid. Like, that's how they got cared for, right? So, you get a lot of weeds. I mean, with the mats, there's technology now is a lot better than it was then, but I just didn't know if any watersheds were aiding in that process.
Yeah, no, I don't know either. Well, I don't know either. I haven't, we haven't looked into that. So I have no idea.
Anybody else have a question for these guys before we go on to practices? I mean, yeah, right here. The issue with carbon is that we could talk all day and still not answer all the questions. So we're probably just scratching the surface on some topics. We're probably not even getting into some topics that you'd hoped we would get into. But your question, go for it.
Yeah, I was just wondering what the situation is with credits by preserving, in regards to preserving old growth forest.
Hey, do you know? Credits for preserving old growth forest. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, any type of forest is available for registration. It's just about, if you're wanting to work with us, giving us a call. We're able to look at the forest with your land location and basically give you a general idea of what's a potential income, and we can look 20 years back in time to see how that forest grew and if there was a disease outbreak or somebody logged it or somebody bulldozed some of it. So that's all information that we would share with the producer if they're wanting to enroll a forest.
As far as the value, is that done by counting with AI, or how does that work?
Yeah, the AI will figure out most of it, and again, depending on how big that forest is, we have to run some circular plot surveys to reconfirm the data that the satellite is seeing in regards to tree species, tree height, and tree diameter.
Yeah, that's the other thing I was wondering, is there much difference between the carbon stored by a 200-year-old tree and a tree that's actively growing?
Well, there's definite difference amount of carbon stored into it, just because again, an old growth forest is going to have all that carbon, called above ground biomass, right? I mean, again, typically, depending on who you're working with, they may or may not be incorporating what's called below ground biomass, and the thing that's not included in any forest project that I've seen in North America is the potential soil carbon sequestration rates in those forests, and nobody's really looking at that stuff other than, to my knowledge, us. But yeah, what would take us, basically, I would just say 40 hours of work 6 months ago in delineating a forest, its type, its species, its height, to get a generalized concept to the landowner of what a project would look like. Again, just 6 months ago, that would take us 40 hours. The AI that we're using, the artificial intelligence that we're using has improved so much that it's taken that 40 hours to 14 seconds, and a computer does it in 14 seconds.
I like trees. I could talk about trees, but let's cut off the tree. But I think, Danielle, let's make a note to self that Ag Days, sorry, Mike's funny. Ag Days 2026, we should have something on these microclimate. This is really interesting. And then trees, carbon, agroforestry. That's a whole interesting topic. Any other questions? Right here.
Hi, good morning. We purchased a grain farm 4 years ago, and we took soil testing, and we have numbers on our carbon in our soil. We seeded it all down to perennial forage and have done more soil testing and have definitely seen an increase in soil carbon. Is this something that your company works with, and should we be looking for some sort of a program that we fit into?
Yeah, it's something that has a potential of being included, and as you mentioned, the most important thing was collection of the soil samples. So, I mean, in this case, it would be reviewing what farm practices have been taken place and reviewing the soil sampling just to make sure that perhaps nothing was missed. But yeah, I mean, willing to sit down and have a chat with you about it for sure.
That sounds great. Thank you. You'll be hearing from me.
Danielle, are you keeping time for me? I'm not checking.
You got a half an hour.
Who
Yeah.
actually pays the carbon credit? Or is it just added on the bottom line of your income tax statement? Who pays it?
Yeah.
Where's the money come?
Good question.
Yeah, again, that's a lot of the confusion here, especially in Western Canada. We've been induated with this concept of a carbon tax. What we are doing is not a carbon tax. It is a voluntary carbon credit. The buyers that we're working with right now for the sale of carbon credits that were measured in 2024 are petrochemical companies in Alberta. So they're purchasing them. Yeah, so the way it works is, I mean, we're the project developers, so to make this economical, we need to aggregate acres together, though each farm is tracked with remote sensing, so nobody's carbon credits are getting mixed with anybody else's. So as we close the buyer and unit price, again, through the contract that we have with producers, the carbon credits are sold as a block, and again, the amount of money that's owed to the producer is just simply paid with a check or a wire deposit.
Question here?
Just a quick question about the sort of demand out there. You talked about the buyers and the companies that are buying. Is that growing? Do you see more companies looking for the ability to buy and purchase those carbon credits from the market? And second question, the 6 months conversation around the AI and the ability to measure that forest, is that happening and those types of changes happening in other measurements of carbon within annual cropland as well?
I guess the, what was that again, Brad? Sorry.
The first question was around the demand for companies that are buying this. Do you see that growing over time going forward? Okay. Is it going to keep booming?
Yeah. Well, on the demand side again.
The question was just, are there more companies coming into this space? Is the demand increasing? Right, Brad? Yeah.
It's kind of this, again, this kind of, I don't want to call it a weird space, but it is, or call it a gray space. I mean, these carbon credits right now are starting to function like Bitcoin or Ethereum, right? So if you look at the largest carbon buyers in the marketplace, they're all of the United States. It's like Microsoft, Google, there's a couple of other large software companies in California. I mean, again, it's just, I'm following trends here, right? So if Microsoft is buying or trying to buy $5 billion worth of carbon credits, they know something that we don't, is my first inclination of what's going on here, right? So, so I think, again, there's potential arbitrages going on behind the scenes that right now, again, with the buyers that we're working with, I just don't see that happening. But when you start looking at these larger corporate conglomerates on how our monetary system works and how this use of digital currency is slowly replacing our fiat-based currencies. A metric of value in these voluntary carbon credits, even though it's existential, right? You can't physically go to a farmer and say, okay, give me your carbon credit. I mean, what are you doing, sifting 2 tons of soil? I mean, that's not going to happen, right? So, I mean, it's these digital assets that, again, when I look at a voluntary carbon credit and its ability to stabilize and restore weather patterns, there's a definite value there. So the question is, you know, how does a voluntary carbon credit play a role in our monetary system as opposed to a Bitcoin, as opposed to an ounce of gold or silver, right?
Okay, I know there's a question here. Chris, I want to spend we got about 12 minutes. I want to spend 5 minutes on practices, 2 minutes on risk, and then we'll come back to this question here. Is that okay? Okay, so what are the practices that you're, just on the market potential, Brad. So your program is also expanding, I think. Did you want to say something on that?
Yeah, so I was talking with Henry at the Southeast Research Farm that runs the program. He said they are looking for more acres. He wasn't able to make it today, but Katie's sitting in the top row there. She has business cards.
That's at Redbirds.
If anyone's interested,
yeah.
And that's who's organizing the program.
Yeah.
So if there's anyone interested, the oats, you are restricted on where you sell because it has to go to Quaker, so it has to be through their buyer. The canola is a much more open market. It's kind of tiered in 2 groups. If you want to switch to the ESN, your variable rate, like focus on your kind of what I would call your standard practices, right? Focus on them, but do better. They'll pay you like kind of at that base tier they have. I'm not going to get into amounts or anything. Talk to Henry on that if you want. And then the second tier is more, okay, you're putting a cover crop. It doesn't have to be with the canola. We do it with the canola for grazing purposes. But it can be, hey, I had a full season cover the year prior. They are counting that because that's, it's in your rotation. It's a practice, right? So cover crops in, rotation close to the canola, but cover crops and then like intercropping or things like that, they're paying at a higher tier because there's a lot more savings there. I'm not saying there's more sequestration. There's a lot more, we do no nitrogen fertilizer on our intercrop, so there's a large amount of your carbon because that's all the trucking. They take that into a factor. So they ask where do you think your fertilizer is coming from? I mean, in our case, it's probably Brandon, but like where it's manufactured, things like that. But so they try and take trucking into effect, things like.
So your practices are reducing emissions. But you're not actually measuring soil carbon.
They aren't, and I think they will. As you say, the technology has advanced a lot in the last year. They aren't right now because the first question is they have to pay for that technology because I'm not probably gonna. I mean, it's gonna be a lot harder to get me involved in the program. It's gonna cost me a lot of money, so they got to pay for all that technology. Plus, they have to have people, and they don't have people here to go put all those probes in the ground to monitor that technology to do it. So the company you actually deal with on collecting the data, I think Henry's maybe starting to do it, but originally I was talking to a person from Brazil because that's who developed the model that they use, and that's who was familiar with it. So they had that company contracted to collect the information. So they take 3 years of information. It doesn't have to be, I actually just read the contract last week because I signed it. They contract at the end of the year to verify that you actually did follow through with what you said you were going to do, and then that's when they send you a check. And then, so they will take, say you made your practice changes 2 years ago, they'll look at the 3 years prior to when you did that for starting your baseline, things like that. Like they're trying to make it very inclusive. I was quite impressed when they started the program. I was also involved with a fertilizer company, but they were focused on, I had to use ESN, and I do variable rate, and I was using ESN at the time, like it made sense, but then all of a sudden I quit using fertilizer on half our farm.
Yeah.
Well, now all of a sudden I was at a $2 an acre tier. I was like, well, what's the point even going through the effort type thing, so like that. So
you kind of dovetailed nicely into the risk, a comment on risk. yours is annual practices. So if your soil carbon goes up and down because you change your practices over time, no big deal.
I get paid on what I did that year.
So you just got to verify that you did what you said you were going to do. You trigger the payment.
Yep. Yeah, and if let's say I said I wasn't going to spray a fungicide, and all of a sudden, you know, the year was going real wet, and I just felt I had to, and I went back to it. In the fall, they reevaluate, take that into consideration. Chances are a practice like that isn't really going to change your tier if you're doing the other stuff, but they just take that into consideration at the time. Yeah, so they just verify it in the fall.
Warren, is risk an issue for you? Like when you look at the carbon market, it's like you might actually have to pay something back because you're involved in something. Is that something that crosses your mind?
It hasn't, not till now. I'm thinking about it now. No, I haven't thought a lot about that at all. You know, to me, there's always going to be risk somewhere. When you're going to we're trying to grow a crop. There's risk. There's no guarantee. So they wouldn't. You know, obviously, risk comes hand in hand with making money, and I would. You know, it just depends on what level of risk you want to accept.
Devron, with your farmers, if their soil carbon is going up, so getting better, and then it takes a dip, who has to pay for that drop in carbon?
Well, it's a rolling forward remeasure every year. So once a credit is produced, it's retired.
Okay.
So again, a reduction in productivity is bottom line dollars to us and the producer. In regards to a risk of reversal or somebody having to pay for credits that they said were sold, I mean, that's where we step in, simply because, again, we're monitoring that risk with remote sensing, number one. Number two, we have an insurance policy for that risk of reversal to the buyer. So if something ever did happen, and I mean, literally the only thing that can happen on the prairies here in Western Canada is if somebody took a bulldozer and ripped off a meter worth of topsoil. I mean, that's how you destroy a carbon project. And the chances of that happening on tens of thousands of acres is almost zero. But there is a chance, which is why we have it insured.
Okay.
You're kind of saying that if you're putting any kind of effort into growing a carbon credit, there's a very, very slim chance you would ever see a reversal. Is basically what you're saying, right? Like.
And when you say you're covered, you have insurance, does that extend to your farmer clients? Or does that insurance end with you?
The insurance product right now is for the buyer for delivery.
Yeah.
And I would say within a year to a year and a half, the producer, him or herself, will be able to buy insurance on their production practice changes. Meaning if the digital models are forecasting 2 credits an acre and you, for some reason, only produce 0.5, the insurance product would cover that, okay. Right? But
so say if it's $50, I'm just throwing out a number, $50 a ton, so you're generating 2 credits, so $100, but you only generate $25, the farmer doesn't have to pay back $75 at the end of the year.
Well, there'd be an insurance process no different than the crop insurance you kind of have right now, right? And that policy is coming. I know they're working on it.
Yeah, okay. Danielle, we got one more question, 2 more?
We got one here.
Okay, let's go with this one first. Yeah.
Okay, so I hope I didn't miss something. I hope it's covered here, but I'm encouraged by what everyone's doing, Chris and Warren, and a lot for their soil health and developing that and creating mitigation for on-farm. In terms of the bigger picture, there's a concern I have on our actual impact, our actual greenhouse impact, if money is coming from oil companies to offset what they're doing, and are we actually doing work that is actually benefiting when we have reports how zero-till only works up to a certain point, like say maybe after 10 or 15 years the carbon actual retention goes down, there's work on that, things like that, or if we are meant to hold land for 100 years without tilling it, that's one thing to get a carbon offset. In our area we need to till once in a while. I guess there's concerns about our actual big picture, impact as farmers, which I hope we want to be doing. I think a lot of us do. Maybe some don't care, they just want the money. But I think there's a bigger picture question that, how can we actually, make sure that we're actually doing the work of helping out, in terms of our environmental impact.
Who wants to start with that one?
I guess I have a comment on, 10 years, you are not going to hit a plateau. It's believed that prior to human settlement, that land in the Red River Valley, so it's 20 minutes west of us, was well north of 16% organic matter. The average there now with heavy vegetable production is under 2%. We have around 6% in our soil, and that's considered high in all of agriculture around the world. 6% organic matter is high. And to think that we would have started with north of 16, and we're considering 6 high, it's going to take lifetimes to ever get to a point where we're going to run out of the ability to store carbon. The other thing is, especially on a mixed farm, when you can integrate those cattle, you can mimic that nature so well that it accelerates the process too. So bison built our soils. Yeah. That's our goal on our farm, is how can we rebuild them with cows instead of bison, but essentially it's the same idea. It's tough to get them across grain acres that efficiently. I will say our valley land in 5 years compared to our grain land, the difference is huge because it only runs cows on rotational grazing. So I don't think we have a limit on when we can store. I don't think we'll ever find it. But I'm not sure that answers all your question. I know that maybe answers a bit on how much can we store as farmers.
I think it comes back. I mean, are we going to solve the world one farm or save the world one farm at a time? Maybe not. But I think every farm can do its part. But yeah, I mean, you're entering a very large question that we probably can't answer on this panel. But Warren or Devron, did you want to respond to that at all?
Well, again, there's going to be seismic shifts in the information industry and trades and everything that has to deal with the implementation of artificial intelligence, right? The one thing that I will point out is that the Intercontinental Panel on Climate Change out of the UN does not include the cooling effect of restoring the small water cycle. And again, this does not make any sense, and I know there is changes happening on the back end to update these climate change models, because if the voluntary market is a path to cooling and restoring weather patterns, why isn't that data included in the worldwide modeling? And just if anybody has any interest, you can Google what's called the Great Green Wall of Africa. They are literally turning the Sahara Desert back into a forest by digging retention pits to hold the rain when they do get rain, and they get about 4 to 6 inches a year. It's amazing, and it's, again, restoring weather.
We're out of time, but I want each of you are going to get a chance to say one last thought. So Chris, you can think whether you want it, your comment wants to be your last.
I was just going to say there's a project similar in China I read about too.
Yeah, okay. Kind
Converting
of working into the desert.
It used to be farmland 800 years ago, whatever. It ended up as a desert, and they're actually bringing it back with the same idea.
So what did you, out of these 90 minutes, is there a takeaway that you've discovered for yourself?
Well, I think just know, I don't know that it's earth-shattering, but I recognize that there's more work to be done in terms of getting up to speed in the opportunity. I've always known that the carbon credits basically is an attempt to monetize the environment so that we can pay attention to it, so we can to actually value our environment, and so we're trying to attach a dollar figure to it. And any plan like that is going to be fraught with all sorts of problems and challenges. And, you know, any plan can work if we're behind it and we want to make it work, but also any plan can fail if we're determined to make it fail. And so it depends on what we want to do with the darn thing. So I think that's just a random thought.
Yeah, right on, thanks. Chris, what's your last thought? Any takeaways for the audience or anything you picked up yourself?
Well, a takeaway would be just stay open to opportunities. You know, you never know what you'll stumble across. It's happened for me a couple times. So, and the other thing is, don't be afraid of try and change. Just try it. Everyone's got a number, whether it's 5 acres or a quarter section, that if that doesn't work, you're not going to hurt the farm. You know, you can weather that risk, and you never know what you'll learn. You know, we switched our entire farm to zero-till in a matter of 2 years, and 7 years ago, I never would have believed we could zero-till in our area. That was most guys still believe that. My dad's sitting in the audience here, and if you want to ask him, he was not happy that first year, because our first year of zero-till was 2022, which was, we weren't as wet as most Manitoba, but we were wet. And we got on the field the same day as the neighbor did across the road after 2 passes of tillage and a spring pass of tillage. And we pulled on the field the same day, and I just told them, don't make ruts, because we're not coming back to get rid of them, so go around the wet areas. And we seeded the field. And no one could believe that that was going to happen. We were the first guys south of Manitou zero-tilling. And I believe zero-till doesn't solve many problems on its own. It's the integration of a cover crop as simple as you have an oats crop, just let it grow in the fall. That's what our first cover crops were. We let the oats crop go, we zero-tilled the next year. And night and day difference between even some other crops or just nothing, if there wasn't something growing there. Manage your water that way. If it's dry in the spring, terminate early. Like, you know, learn some lessons that you gotta learn.
Do you have a website or a Twitter handle or an Instagram so people can come find your tour next year? You're gonna have
no, I'm not really on much social media or anything, but I will give out my cell number if anyone wants to write it down. I have a newborn, so I'm not really fielding many calls right now, but feel free to shoot me a text, and I'll make a list, and if you have questions, I'm open to answering them, but I'll make a list and I'll send out, we do it late July, we usually pick the date kind of in spring, see how things are going.
Okay, Devron, I gotta cut you off, Chris. You got 30 seconds and then we gotta wrap up. Thanks, Danielle.
Yeah, I guess my parting thought is without nutrient-dense food and water, you don't have an economy, and I think those 2 points over the next 10 years are going to become abundantly apparent, and what's going to drive change in agriculture and forestry is going to be the utilization of these voluntary carbon credits.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you.
They'll come to you.